Okay, thanks very much. If you've attended any of the Wellbeing Team's PL events, you know we love a quick check-in. I know we're leading up to Christmas events in schools. For many of you, that will be face-to-face for the first time in a while, but just wanted to find out how you were doing. You can use the chat to record that in, or just come off mic and shout out. Are you a 1 feeling slightly overwhelmed, or are you feeling really comfortable with everything in full control? 1 to 5, just let us know in the chat how you're doing. Got some 3s, some 4s. Hey, excellent. We didn't have any 4s yesterday. Some 3s. It seems to be we're heading towards that time of year, aren't we, where we're looking forward to that Christmas break. Thank you so much for all of you popping that in. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so let's get down to it. I just want to give you some context to TAP, which stands for Tackling All Aspects of Poverty. Some of it is very pertinent, particularly following some events we've attended very recently. TAP fits into our team's tiered approach to supporting disadvantaged learners and mitigating for the impact of poverty. Sort of emerging from the pandemic, once that we really started to revisit our thought process on poverty and what that meant in schools. And at that point, we didn't know we were going to see a massive cost of living crisis hit us as well. But we do feel that we're somewhat prepared to support schools, even though it's in a rapidly changing picture. So before we go any further, much of what I will talk to you about today, you will already know, and you will already be thinking about, and you'll probably be doing some of it as well. But this is more about pulling that together into a strategy and developing an approach that is clearly understood by everybody, staff, colleagues, parents, learners, governors, and your wider community. And on this particular slide, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. Back in June, Jeremy Miles made a speech at the Bevan Foundation where he pinpointed the progress of disadvantaged learners as his #1 priority. And almost as a follow-up to that, in September, Eston made it very clear that the progress of disadvantaged learners, and what they meant by that was those eligible for FSM and those just above the threshold, would be a real focus for inspection. And last month, the team attended the policy insight session on community focus schools, where Jane Edwards, the HMI, said that Eston would look in particular at IA4, so the leadership area of inspection, with a focus on how leaders pay due regard to the impact of poverty on learners, and they would expect to see a read across all areas of inspection in what schools are doing to mitigate the impact of poverty. So really, it's been put front and centre of government process and really of Eston, but also it's really front and centre for many of our schools at the moment. And I'm sure you're experiencing that as families deal with the impact of the cost of living crisis. So to get a picture of who and what it is we're truly focused on, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. What's the current threshold for claiming free school meals in Wales? And if you could just pop that into the chat, that would be great. On the many quotes are coming straight through, it is in fact, yes, £7,400. Thank you for everyone that's very quickly put that into the chat. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it is in fact. It is terrible, Ryan. You're absolutely right. This is the threshold, which isn't very much at all. And there are huge swathes of families who earn more than this, but are still living in poverty, and many of whom are what we now label working poor. And TAP is really designed to think about, yes, your EFSM learners, but also the many families, and for some schools, it doubles the number of children that they think of as disadvantaged, who are living with an income that doesn't qualify them for free school meals, but still they're struggling and can't actually make ends meet. So just some figures for what that translates like in Wales. It's 34% of children in Wales living in poverty currently, which means their families earn 60% or less of the median wage. And in Monmouthshire, your figures currently translate to approximately 4,000 children, which is quite a high proportion, really. When we start to look at TAP, we look at some of the consequences which can be detrimental to a person's life chances. In the TAP programme, we focus on the context and consequences of poverty. So we use research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which the left-hand graphic shows. Obviously, our focus is on lower educational attainment, but all of the things that they list have some sort of effect. And what we're particularly interested in are the elements which the Child Poverty Action Group on the right have done some research into, which is how poverty feels to children. I think this is a really great image that really explores how poverty feels for them, and from that, the behaviours and attitudes that might well stem from those feelings. The behaviours and attitudes often form part of the challenge that we experience in supporting disadvantaged learners. So I just want to show you some of the research. We work quite closely on the TAP programme with Child Poverty Action Group, and members of the charity group come to participate in part of the programme that we do, and they provide some of the resources. Okay, what we're thinking about is how from these things our whole school approach to tackling poverty can develop. So very quickly, I've used the acronym TAP. I've told you it means tackling all aspects of poverty. It was originally designed to support schools in addressing the impact of poverty on learners, families and the wider community. And the original programme is 4 one-hour modules, and the next cohort for that will actually begin the first week back. But for Monmouthshire, we have adapted this into a one-day professional learning event, which will cover defining poverty, and it's not just financial, it's cultural, generational, urban, rural, the different types of poverty that children experience. The 5 levers, the tiered approach and engagement with those elements of poverty. We look at a resource called Thinking Differently, which some of you may be familiar with. And we start to think about developing a whole school and/or cluster anti-poverty strategy. So we started back in March with a pilot programme. We've run 2 further cohorts in the summer and in September, and in January cohort 4 will begin. And this is what we look at through the programme. As you can see, there's a lot covered: context, policy, strategy and resources. We work with charitable foundations. We look at the types of poverty. We look at the impact. We look at the impact of the cost of living crisis. We think about the empathy and equity approach in driving the whole school approach to anti-poverty. We provide some strategies to support schools. We provide some resources to support you. And we focus quite a lot on engaging with learners, staff, families and the wider community through an anti-poverty lens. And that last point emphasises the importance of knowledge that schools hold for everyone, and the relationships. And it's thinking about how information is gathered and shared with everyone. And for example, in previous cohorts, we've talked about the fact that within a school, there can be an awful lot of information from attendants, from admin staff, from catering staff, from heads of year, from wellbeing leads, from pastoral leads. But quite often, all those people don't get together to specifically talk about their disadvantaged learners and what's happening, and how much induction do NQTs have and new staff to the school around those things, and how much involvement do the non-teaching staff have. And we pose lots of questions, and for some schools it's part and parcel of what they do, and for some schools it actually does bring to the forefront the need to maybe change some of their approaches. So as well as the sort of delivery from somebody standing at the front, the training involves a lot of discussion around table groups where schools learn from each other and talk things through with each other as well. So what does this translate to in school? These are the areas that the participants will really consider in relation to their own schools and their clusters, really understanding the impact of poverty, thinking about individual school context. This is not a one size fits all. Each school will have a very individual context, and you won't be the same as the school down the road. Your size may be different, your catchment may be different, your phases may be different. These all impact on how your strategy will develop, but there will be common threads that run through as well. We'll be asking you to reflect on what you currently do. We'll be asking you to reflect on the structures and leadership around disadvantaged learners within schools. We'll be asking you how well you know your learners, your families and your communities. And then we'll be asking you to think about what you don't know as well, because there are always little gaps and there are always things that we can pick up and support on. We'll be thinking about how we can develop an anti-poverty strategy, either individual to each school or across a cluster. And we'll be thinking about determining next steps. And there will be some activities for people to go away and work on. I just wanted to share with you some of the practical resources, some of which you can see here. So included in this, we've got toolkits for addressing the cost of the school day, support materials on engaging with all stakeholders, a roadmap for developing an anti-poverty strategy, to name but a few. Some of those resources are things that we have created. Some of the resources are nationally trialled and developed, such as the cost of the school day and the cost of the school day calendar. And those are things that we will share, some of which you may well do already, some which may be new to you to utilise. So just to really overview what we'll do, following this session, I'll be sending out a forms link for registering for the January PL events. So those PL events will be on the 23rd and the 25th of January, and it's an either or. Please don't sign up for both, it's one or the other. We'll deliver the professional learning event in January, and then we'll facilitate a sharing of practice impact event in the summer term, where we'll bring everyone back together to talk about the journey that they've been on and what's been happening back in schools. We'll also create a team space for all of the TAP resources for Monmouthshire schools. So whoever signs up from each school to participate in the training will have access to the team space for all of the resources. Then we'll offer bespoke support as a follow-up for any schools or clusters interested in further development of an anti-poverty strategy. And any schools that would be interested on the back of this of joining the regional recorded RADI programme for 23-24 are very welcome to apply. Applications will open in the spring term for the RADI programme to begin in April. RADI is the raising the achievement of disadvantaged learners. It's a national programme, many schools in the EAS do it, and if you want to find out a little bit more locally to you, Thornwell, Castle Park and Kimmin View are three of the primary schools that have undertaken the RADI programme in Monmouthshire. It's fully funded. As with all of the support that I've mentioned, there is no cost currently for schools to participate in that. So,
Jane, sorry to interrupt. There's a question in the chat about one email says it's January 23rd and the 27th, not 25th. Please, can you confirm?
It is the 23rd and the 27th. Sorry, that was my error. Okay, so there are some things that need to happen really before your participants, whoever you decide to come to the training, actually turns up in January. And it might be useful to discuss these at an SLT meeting because they need to come armed with some school context. So some questions to be discussed and considered. How does your school define its disadvantaged learners? And for some schools, that is the EFSM learners. For other schools, that's children outside of EFSM, but for whom they know poverty is an issue at home. Who in the school monitors, supports and evaluates the progress of your disadvantaged learners? How does your school engage with families and the wider community? What strategies do you currently have in place for mitigating the impact of poverty? and what can you currently see as the gaps. We don't want someone to come with a big report. We just want them to come armed, able to discuss with table groups or with a wider group those particular points. So it might be useful in the new year, just as an SLT, to have a discussion around that. I'm aware that there's some questions coming up in the chat, so I'll come back to those in just a second, because I just want to run through what it is you need to do next. What needs to happen next is you need to select who's going to attend the training, and you need to think a little carefully about that, who might be best placed to drive the anti-poverty agenda. Ideally, that would be a member of SLT with responsibility for monitoring progress of disadvantages or involvement in family and community engagement or evaluating provision. It is really helpful if it is a member of SLT, because you want somebody who has that gravitas to drive the anti-poverty agenda across the whole school. And what do we expect of that participant? That they'll attend the PL session and the follow-up session in the summer. There are commitments to act that are explored during the session, and that will be an expectation. That almost is how you start to develop the work within school. There's an expectation that they will support and develop the provision for disadvantaged learners, that they'll develop a whole school approach, and we'll provide them with the tools to do that around the national and the international research that will influence practice, and to share information, resources and ideas with school colleagues. So what needs to happen next is selecting your appropriate delegate. I'll be sending out a Microsoft form for you to register the delegates. That will be emailed after this session. They will need to have their hub email address attached to that, and there'll be space for that to happen. For some of you, you might wish to discuss with cluster colleagues which date you want to do. If you're going to have an agreed cluster approach, you might want to have the same date agreed to attend. And then complete the pre-event preparation tasks before the 23rd or the 27th. So, having talked at you quite a lot, I know there's some questions that have come up in the chat. I'm not sure whether Monmouthshire are including supply cover to attend training events, but for RADI, it tends not to happen that you will need that much cover. We actually pay all the fees for RADI for that. Joe is asking, can 2 of us attend? It's generally 1 person from each school, but I will look to see when people have signed up if there is capacity to invite further. It's just depending on the size of the room that we've got at Court Blevin as to whether we can have extra people. Ryan, if you stay on the line, I will catch up with you at the end. If you stay at the end of the meeting, we can discuss that further, if that's okay. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Kelly, I saw that you came in late. If you want to stay at the end as well, I can catch up with you a little bit further. Okay, well, folks, if there isn't anything else, I'm going to stop us recording a second.